This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states or situations.
My name is Lily, and I've had hidradenitis suppurativa, HS, for years. I finally found some relief since taking Cosentyx. Relief means I can show up more.
Cosentyx secukinumab is prescribed for adults with moderate to severe hidradenitis suppurativa, HS. Don't use if you're allergic to Cosentyx. Before starting, get checked for tuberculosis. An increased risk of infections and lowered ability to fight them may occur, like tuberculosis or other serious bacterial, fungal, or viral infections. Some are fatal. Tell your doctor if you have an infection or symptoms like fevers, sweats, chills, muscle aches, or cough, had a vaccine or plan to, or if inflammatory bowel disease symptoms develop or worsen. Serious allergic reactions and severe eczema-like skin reactions may occur. Learn more at 1-844-COSENTYX or Cosentyx.com.
Ask your dermatologist about Cosentyx.
Hey Immigrantly family, this is Saadia Khan. I have some great news for all of you. We recently launched our newsletter, which comes out 3 times a week. It's called Hyphenly, which is our no-fluff newsletter with hot takes, heartfelt stories, and all the feels of living in between cultures. Come for the nuance, stay for the vibes. You can find the link to subscribe in our show notes. Don't forget to subscribe. Hello and welcome back to Immigrantly. I am your host, Saadia Khan. So I was in Pakistan recently and I am still ruminating over the trip. And today I have a bit of a hot take to share with all of you. So brace yourselves because I know I am about to offend someone from the South Asian diaspora. Since we were in Pakistan during peak mango season, my husband literally devoured mangoes every chance he got. I enjoyed them too. But here's the thing. I couldn't really tell the difference between the mangoes I usually get here in the States and the famed Pakistani ones. I know. What I'm saying is basically blasphemous. But honestly, guys, that's what I discovered and it got me thinking. Has my palate changed? Or maybe this thing I romanticized for so long just fell flat. Do you ever have that moment where something you've built up in your mind, maybe from childhood, maybe from identity or nostalgia, doesn't hit the same anymore? Something to think about. And now on to today's episode. My guest is Nijla Mumin, an award-winning writer and filmmaker whose work explores the deeply intimate, nuanced intersections of Black and Muslim girlhood, longing, and spiritual searching. Her debut film, Jinn, which came out in 2018, was a revelation, a coming-of-age story that held space for both joy and contradiction. Nijla is someone who doesn't just tell stories, she tells truths that often live in the margins of the mainstream. She really focuses on the humanity and strips other identities off so that people can connect with other humans at a granular level. So today, we are diving into art, identity, faith, which may look very different for different people, and the freedom to hold multitudes. So without further ado, let's get into our conversation with Nijla. Thank you, Najla, for taking the time out. I'm pretty sure you have a very busy schedule. Were you editing your new feature film or short film?
So I just finished a director's cut edit for an episode of TV that I just directed.
Oh, nice. Can you share which one or?
Well, the show is called Reasonable Doubt, and it's the season 3. And yeah, it's a great show. I have the film currently called Noor that is a feature, but we shot a short film version of it. And that short film is currently screening at different places.
So, how excited are you?
I'm excited. It's been such a long journey, trying to get the film made. It's been about 15 years from the start of writing the feature until now. It just feels really good to finally have something to share with the world, even though it's not the full feature. It's a glimpse into the world. And I think it's a world that we've never really seen before. That's what I'm really interested in. I'm always really interested in exploring cultural worlds that we just don't see. And that's what I did with my first feature film, Jinn, which was a coming of age story about a Black Muslim teenage girl, just making sense of her identity and her mother's conversion to Islam. And then this film, which is about a Black woman named Noor and her relationship with an Arab man who she meets in a neighborhood bodega or corner store, and the relationship that unfolds out of their union, their meeting in this location out of a unfortunate situation, but it becomes something that is beautiful. So that is Noor, and is like a very special story to me, something that I've always wanted to make.
Najla, your first film, Jinn, as you mentioned, is semi autobiographical, right? Is that true?
So my first film, Jen, it definitely pulls from elements of my coming of age, my younger life. I am an artist and I take creative license with stories.
My identity is shaped by my parents. They come from 2 very different worlds.
And your mother, she's discovering things.
Summer, put that back on.
You ever thought about maybe temporarily giving in?
You mean like converting to Islam?
No.
I think you look cute in the scarf. Could play around with it.
You gonna wear that to work?
I really wanted to show 2 characters, Summer and her mother Jade, who actually are entering into Islam as converts or reverts, and what that looked like. I actually was born Muslim. I was born into Islam. My parents were already Muslim when I was born. And so I didn't have an experience where a parent was entering into the religion. But I wanted to just take a step further and explore what that journey would feel and look like for those 2 characters, for a teenager and an older mother, and just all the different elements of that, all the different senses, all the taste, the touch, the smell, like all those very sensory details, pull those together and see through the lens mainly of this teenage girl in our current society, where there's a lot of Islamophobia and where this person is now in the world and they see that that's not true.
Wear that to work?
I have finally found something that makes me happy, and you want to mock it instead of maybe learning something.
Learning what? How to hide behind scarves and holy passages instead of just saying you want to be accepted for once. I didn't know
There's a lot of beauty in that way of life in Islam. So there's so much about the story that comes from a real place of like my life. But there's, definitely a lot of it that is me kind of imagining what I would have wanted when I was growing up, conversations I wish that I could have had with my parents, acceptance, no judgment, that I wish I could have experienced when I was growing up, that I was able to give Summer, so that was very important to me.
They say to only bring what you can carry. So with the all-new 2025 Ford Expedition Tremor, bring a lot. Like 3 dirt bikes, a few tents, an entire crew ready to make memories. A panoramic 24-inch display, and the confidence to push your limits. The all-new 2025 Ford Expedition Tremor.
Always consult the owner's manual before off-road driving. Know your terrain and trail difficulty and use appropriate safety gear. Max payload varies based on accessories and vehicle configuration. See label on door jamb for carrying capacity of a specific vehicle. Always properly secure cargo.
Let's go back to your childhood then. What was it like?
Yeah, I mean, my childhood, like I said, I was born into a Muslim community in the Bay Area. My father is a very devout Muslim. At the time I was born, my mother was married to my father. And shortly after I was born, my parents divorced. So I was between different worlds in terms of being with my mother and being with my father. And I was really encouraged to be a free spirit growing up by my family and my parents. I love to, sing. I love to dance. I love to write. I was an avid reader. I loved reading novels that were advanced for my age. So I really became a writer through reading fiction and novels that some of them were like adult novels that weren't really for kids, but that is how I gained my literacy and really became the writer and the speaker that I am, is through reading. So that was really a big part of my childhood, was the arts, was going to dance class, singing, music videos, like pop culture was a big thing alongside, being a Muslim, going to the masjid with my father, like being in the Bay Area, which was a very multicultural setting. There's a lot of activism. There's a lot of, it's the home of the Black Panthers. Like, it's a very political kind of activist oriented environment. So you have all those things adding up. When you're an artist, it encouraged me to like take my art seriously and want to have a purpose, a social political purpose in my art, and not just, make art just for the sake of it. I was also a poet, so I wrote a lot of poetry. Poetry was like the first seed of like probably my filmmaking. And you see in a lot of my films where either there's kind of poetic voiceover or a character saying a poem, it's, internal monologue. That's all from the poetry that I started writing as a child.
You mentioned that you wish you could have certain conversations with your parents. Can you give me an example of what kind of conversation you wish and you hoped you could have with your parents as a child?
Yeah, I mean, growing up at that time, especially when you're becoming a teenager and you're starting to develop feelings or have, your body's going through changes, or you want to talk about certain subjects, that is not always something that I think, not even just in my life, but just in general, in that time where there was sometimes not that openness to have those certain conversations around even just sexuality, or just, what you're feeling, or like things of that nature. I think there was less conversations around that. And I think now we have a world where I think young people, teenagers, are able to have those conversations more. It's not really a big deal. When I was coming up, especially I went to a public school, and there wasn't a lot of openness toward different identities. There was, of course, homophobia. There was Islamophobia, people making jokes about different people, because there wasn't a shared knowledge, sometimes in that environment. I remember that, but I also remember there was a lot of people who were open, kids who, like friends and teachers, who were very much like open-minded and very progressive, and wanted to really know my story and know who I was and advocate for different cultures. So like there was a mix. It was the Bay Area, but there was definitely a mix of, you know, openness and people who were not very accepting of different identities. So I was I witnessed all of that, and I was, targeted by certain people, but that's a part of growing up. And I knew that as an artist, I would have to like use my art to like push through that and show like a different side of identity.
Talking about art, I want to pivot to your film, Jinn, which is a quiet but very powerful exploration of how people interpret and practice faith, especially Islam, right? In the US now, Islam is often portrayed as rigid or absolute without the same grace or flexibility that's extended to other religions. Do you think that the cultural lens really feeds into this persistent trope about Muslims, especially Muslim women? And how did you navigate that perception in your storytelling in Jinn?
When I was writing Jen many years ago, it feels like another world. I was writing from a space of truth and honesty. I didn't think about, oh, what is the dominant image and how am I gonna go against that? I was writing from a space of just human complexity, that these are just people, they're human beings who are Muslim, and they have so much that they are striving for, that they're battling, that they're going through. I wanted to get at the internal complication of my characters. I think it's very important to go beyond just a superficial or surface representation, specifically of Muslim women, because everyone's different. Everyone, not everyone is going to be practicing Islam the same. Not everyone has the same upbringing when it comes to Islam. Like, there are so many stories when it comes to faith. And I wanted each character to have their own unique inner world. They are all Muslim, but the way that they are engaging with it and the struggle that they're going through is all very different. And I just let that inform my writing. My writing is, like I said, is a bit very character based, and it's about just people first and just what makes a complicated person. I think in film, that's what we tend to lean into when we see a character who's like a person and they're like full of different layers. That's how I was writing that film. I wasn't that concerned with, I knew that it's definitely Muslim, but I wasn't like censoring myself or trying to fit a narrative of what I thought a Muslim is or was.
That's an interesting take. And I recently watched your film. It is a complicated, nuanced depiction of human characters, right? But as a Muslim, full disclosure, there were moments where I felt like the characters were feeding into certain stereotypical tropes around Muslim identity. But the beautiful thing about your film is that the very next moment, you see that there is a reclamation of who they are, and there is an explanation of how and why they behave a certain way, which at the end of the day is very human, irrespective of their faith. And then faith becomes a backdrop against which you watch those characters. So, what kind of feedback did you get from people after watching Jen?
Yeah, that's interesting. In terms of stereotypes, I never create from that space. So I'm interested in kind of what your take is on that.
Maybe it's how Muslims feel in the US, the space that has been created for them, where they're always vigilant and alert when it comes to their depiction in the media. So, for instance, example about Tahir, who is Summer's love interest, wearing a cap. So that was a very visible marker of Muslim identity. And to me, a lot of Muslim boys would probably not wear cap. And I almost had to take a pause and say, this is a depiction of one person, one Muslim character, and there are many who would, and then there are so many who wouldn't. And that nuance and that flexibility lends itself in your movie. But as a Muslim viewer, I had to readjust my expectations because I was already, I would say, tense or hyper vigilant going into the movie because there have been so many instances where Muslims have been depicted in a certain light, right? Does that make sense?
It does. I think also wearing a kufi cap for me growing up and coming from an African American Muslim community and also being a part of one here in Los Angeles, that is not something that is a stereotype. That is something that you will see. Um, you'll see them have a kufi cap on. My father actually has a large collection of kufi caps. He wears kufi caps like all the time. So that's something for me. Like I said, I write from a space of truth and observation. That's a truth for me. It's not something that I'm doing to, like show something, or it's more about that's a truth and that's a texture and that's a fabric and all these things that comes from like the core of my own experience. I think one of the things that is really something that is going to have to maybe change in terms of how we approach Muslim stories is understanding that like one story cannot represent every Muslim. It just cannot. And unfortunately, we're at a space, especially right now, where there's not a lot of stories about Muslims. And if you're talking about Hollywood, you're probably not going to get any made out of from there. And so we have to look at each story as that is that artist's interpretation, and that maybe their experience, maybe it's not. But I think we have to kind of like let that be the way we look at art. Because when we look at movies made by non-Muslims, we don't say, oh, we watched the movie by this filmmaker, and that represents all white women or that represents every Black man. No, it doesn't. It represents that artist's perspective. And that's how you have to look at even a film by a Muslim. We can't just want one movie to serve every single Muslim. It just won't. This is my own perspective, and it's my own story. So you have to like allow that to live.
Absolutely. And Najla, we are pretty much aligned there. What I'm trying to say is that unfortunately, a lot of times when it comes to minorities and when it comes to certain identities, including Muslim identity, the problem or the caveat is that the viewer or listeners, if it's an audio content, really perceive those characters and those depictions as absolute depictions of entire community, right? And that's what I was trying to get at. You're absolutely right. We see so many different iterations of white women, but Muslim characters are not given that grace or that space to experiment, to be themselves, to show that each Muslim character has its own story. And as you said, you saw your dad wearing kufi cap growing up. He has a beautiful collection. I did not see that growing up. The only time my dad would wear one in Pakistan was when he was praying. And so for me, that became, especially in the Western culture or the Western media, it became a depiction or a physical marker of, oh, this person is Muslim, and anybody who's not wearing a cap is not Muslim, right? And that's such a contradiction that you and I see as two Muslim women who grew up in different circumstances. And that's why I really enjoyed Jinn because, as I said, I would feel like there was a stereotype coming and then you would just reclaim it and it became part of a human story eventually because I had to tell myself, yes, she's telling a story of a Black Muslim kid or a Black Muslim girl. And she understands it because that's part of her identity. And I, as a South Asian Muslim woman, I have to step back and not make that judgment, right? There were moments when I felt that, but then I had to stop myself, which I'm sure a lot of Muslims, at least listening to this podcast, would be like, yeah, we do that all the time, right? Like I have heard so many Muslims talk about why we always show Muslim women wearing hijab. And that too is not because they don't think that Muslim women should wear hijab. They see it as a stereotypical trope that's been used time and again in Western culture.
And it's really about undoing that trope because there's so much beauty in hijab and wearing a scarf. When I go to Juma here in LA at a masjid, and of course I have a scarf on and I love the feeling of wearing a scarf. Like I don't understand the kind of oppressive harm that has been put on that. But that doesn't mean everyone wants to wear hijab, wants to wear a scarf. And we have to have, I think, openness because there's so much to Islam and to the way of life that go beyond that, just having a scarf on or wearing hijab. And I think sometimes that becomes the only image, and for my film and for a lot of my films that have a Muslim character, I want to show like other elements of this identity that are special to me and show how like being a good person and having an inner world and like really striving to be the best you can be is actually a very beautiful part of being a Muslim, and it's beyond any kind of physical marker.
And going back to the film itself, there's a moment in Jinn where Summer dances wearing a hijab. She's joyful, she's free, she's unbothered. And that image really stayed with me because, again, that's a teenage girl, just expressing her agency. And that visual, what did it mean to you as you were creating it?
That was very personal to me because I grew up dancing and singing and like I'm a performer. So I love to be on stage and I'm a Muslim. I had to find a way to merge those identities. Like I personally, I never had an experience where I was in a scarf dancing like that, but I wanted to bring like all the parts of myself to this story. And my father, he loves dancing. Like we come from a family, an African American family, on both my mom and dad's side, they like to dance and they like to be having a good time. And so I wanted to bring that into this film. You can see how certain characters, they're fun. Like they want to, you know, there's a character, Rashida, who's just a cool mom that we don't have to just show strict parents and like just whatever the stereotype is. We can show all the different types of people that make up our community. And so like the dancing was a part of that, of like it's freedom, it's beauty, it's, dancing is very freeing.
And then the title itself, Jen. Full disclosure, I haven't really done enough research, and somebody listening to me right now may be like, oh my gosh, she's Muslim. She doesn't know anything about jinns. I do. I know the concept, the mythology, the religious side of it. But what does the word jinn evoke in you? What kind of relationship do you have with jinn? The concept itself.
It's a spirit. And in the context of this film, it was about Summer's interpretation of the Jinn spirit mythology as she's entering into the faith, kind of looking at, wow, jinns can be good, they can be bad, they can influence you to do certain things. but they're not people. So I think as a teenager, as she's experiencing all these different emotions and kind of transitioning, she's thinking about being a teenager, maybe a metaphor for being a Jinn, but it's not like she is one, definitely not. But it is a way that she's able to like understand different ways of being. It's not praising Jinn or anything. I think people, when they see the title, they're like, oh my God, Jinn, it's like horror movie. It's this is advocating. No, it's not. It's really just about a teenager who is interpreting that, trying to understand what that means in relationship to her conversion and to her development as a person.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. When you visit the doctor, you probably hand over your insurance, your ID, and contact details. It's just one of the many places that has your personal info. And if any of them accidentally expose it, you could be at risk for identity theft. LifeLock monitors millions of data points a second. If you become a victim, they'll fix it, guaranteed, or your money back. Save up to 40% your first year at lifelock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
There's another thing that really spoke to me as somebody who's born into this faith. It really got me thinking about how I approach my religion versus how somebody who chooses to become of certain faith, how they interact with that. And since you were also born into this religion, what was the trigger to set this story in this setting, right? About a revert rather than somebody who was born into this culture. And were you at any time skeptical or scared that you may misrepresent somebody who's been on that journey?
So the trigger was, so basically this film has been through different versions and iterations. So the first version of this script was called Salam, which means peace. And that was about a Black Muslim girl who's born into Islam. Her mother is very devout. Like it was a more traditional story in terms of like it followed um, more of my experience to a T. And as I developed this next draft, which became Jinn, was like, actually, I just started to get images of of a Black teen girl riding her bike, dancing, and her mother entering into the masjid and just being so pulled in and just full of love and just hear the adhan. And she's not seduced, but just entranced by this world. That was the new images that came to me. So as a writer, when you start to kind of get repeat images and in your mind and they don't go away, and I think they mean something. Usually when that happens to me, I start to write them down, and that is the beginning of a story. So I went from the previous iteration of the script into a new one where I was like, I want to explore what it would look like to enter into Islam, especially for viewers who are not familiar with Islam, right? They're entering into it with the character. They're feeling what the character is feeling. Like if they're uncomfortable, if they're feeling like at ease, relief, like love, like this is helping maybe an audience member who is not Muslim to understand what it feels like to be a Muslim. That actually was a part of that. I was like, wow, this is interesting because a lot of people who asked about the reception got great reception from, audiences, Muslims and non-Muslims. There's a lot of people who aren't Muslim who love this film because it captures like a human feeling, but also because they didn't really know. And the film is not about educating
Oh, it's not.
anyone.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's really not about educating, but it can give, some insight or make someone like want to learn more. But I just thought it would be really interesting to like show what it felt like to enter into Islam and like that kind of feeling. Also, my father, he reverted. He was not born Muslim, and my mother was not born Muslim. So I had a lot of information from them about their experiences coming into the faith and other Muslims who were reverts. So I had research, I had, my dad, and I had so many people who were able to inform that. But also as a storyteller, I was able to, even though I'm born into it, there were certain things growing up that I was like, wow, like, that was just a world that I knew, but when I went into a secular world or a world of the public school, or I had a lot of friends who were not Muslim, and I was surrounded by just behaviors and things that were just so different from what I was born to know. There was a lot of confusion, just feeling like what is going on. So I could actually relate to Summer because I feel like because I was a teen and I was a part of two worlds, I understand what it feels like for someone to say, call you a Muslim, or just say, just come and question who you are because you're a Muslim. I had that happen to me several times growing up by non-Muslim people.
Which is so strange and unfortunate. It happens to us all the time. Either we are too Muslim or not Muslim enough. That's the struggle that a lot of Muslims face.
Yeah, both I've experienced. There's a scene in Jinn where Jade comments on something Summer has on. She's like, why do you have, and she's like, you bought me this. But I had those experiences where I remember I had some shorts on as a kid, and one of my Muslim aunts, was like, why do you have that on? Like, my mom bought me, she bought me the shorts. So, there's a lot of confusion that can happen, especially when you're a teenager or a young person. Once you start being, we live in America here in different cultural settings, and you're like, how do I navigate?
Smart Water Alkaline with antioxidant.
Whoa, that's refreshing.
And a 9.5 plus pH for every way you move.
I did take a Spain class today.
Restoring like a pro. Smart Water Alkaline with antioxidant. For those with a taste for taste. Grab yours today.
Talking about the film industry in general, I want to talk a little bit about the space itself, right? You're part of it. You're creating some great content. And we see the industry acknowledging the importance of inclusion. But where you sit right now, Nijla, what's still missing? And what change would you feel truly meaningful to you?
What would be very meaningful to me in this moment would be to get the funding to tell my stories. It is very hard to make original stories, and especially in the climate right now, in our political climate, especially in the United States, where there's just not a lot of openness toward, first of all, original stories that aren't a franchise or a superhero movie or IP, a book or something. It's just a story that someone came up with. There's not a lot of those being greenlit. And then there's just money is the biggest factor of, and why you don't see more of our stories. If people had the funding to make these movies, then we would definitely see more of them on the screen. That is what kind of separates, certain filmmakers from others. And I think if that was available, then I would be in a better place, because the other film, Noor, that I talked about earlier, I would be able to make that film right now because it's only $1 million that I need, which is not a lot of money for a feature film. But because of the subject matter and just our climate and just different factors, it has been incredibly difficult to convince certain companies or producers that the story should be made, because they don't see, that it could be commercial. But I know that people will want to see this film because I'm around people and I know what people want to watch. I've showed the short film, people were moved, they can't wait to do the feature. And so I know because I'm on the ground with people what people want. But people who are at the top who have like no idea of what actually makes a good film, those are the people a lot of times running studios. So it can be really hard to get beyond that as I'm an independent filmmaker, but still you have to go out and find investors and financiers who want to get behind the movie.
You said people at the top don't understand. I think by saying that they don't understand, we are giving them the benefit of the doubt. I think they fully understand. It's the power dynamic. Once they know that these stories get out, then perceptions will change. And then how people approach certain communities will change. And maybe that's what they don't want.
I agree.
So I'm skeptical about whether they know or not.
Yeah, I agree with you. Media is such a powerful tool. I went to school at UC Berkeley and I studied a lot. My major was mass communications and media studies. Studied the impacts of media on people and on our choices a lot when I was an undergrad. So that's how I understand that when you put an image on screen or you make a movie, it's not just a movie. It's an intentional, it can be propaganda. A lot of movies are propaganda. A lot of them are political endorsements of certain ideas. And so you have to understand that's what you're doing. And I always have that when I make a movie. So I do think that, and it's not all of, I'm not saying everyone at the top of Hollywood is like this, but I do think some people who run some of these companies, yeah, like it's an intentional choice to not allow these stories to be made. I remember recently meeting with someone like an exec who told me, like she felt like no one will make my film noir, no one in the industry. And I'm like, my heart sank because that is so sad to hear. But I have to believe, there's someone I that is going to believe in this. And to make my film Jinn, that's also the belief I had. Even it's independent, we found independent investors. And maybe this will be the same way for this other film. But I think having this feeling of defeat and like, oh, no one cares, that doesn't really help an artist, especially right now. You have to believe that it can be done and it will, just maybe not in the time that you.
We are manifesting it right now on this podcast.
Yeah, like, I just have to keep the faith because if I start saying, like, woe is me, it's never going to happen, like that you speak that into existence. And so I just continue to pray and keep the faith somehow.
So apart from Noor, what else are you dreaming about right now as a storyteller, as an artist? Is there a story that you haven't yet told that's really pulling at you and maybe next after Noor?
I do. I'm actually developing another story right now, but it's like too early to really talk about it. But I'm having those, like I talked about, those images come to me and I'm like writing them down and coming up with like a treatment, which is very exciting to me. So I'm in that process. And then I have another love story actually that's based in the Bay Area where I'm from called Mosswood Park. And it's a 4-chapter love story about two young artists or two young kids who meet at a summer camp in Oakland. And then they have like this very like complicated bond until adulthood. It's kind of like literature. It takes you through 4 chapters of their relationship. And you're just wondering, will they end up together? It's a feature film. I've been trying to get that one made for 5 years now. It's a journey. And it's not a Muslim film, but it's such a classic love story. I think anyone would be able to relate to having a relationship with someone over time, how it changes, and then how your home changes. It looks at how Oakland and the Bay Area have changed over time.
I would love to see that. And to your point, the stories that you're telling, even Jinn, as I was watching it, yes, there were moments when I could really connect with the Muslim aspect of it or Muslimness, but it's a human story at the end of the day. And Muslim stories are human stories. Why do we forget that? It's like what surprises me about America, which is so interesting and crazy and messy, somehow America has been able to box certain identities in a way where people don't see them as human anymore. It's like you are an immigrant or you are Muslim or you are Black, but where's the humanity in all of it? We are all humans at the end of the day.
So it's just not even something I want to watch. I see certain things. I'm like, I don't even want to watch that because when I can't access the humanity in a character, in a person, I don't want to just watch villains and types, just doing things, just being violent and doing harmful acts on screen. Like I'm at a point in life where I'm just not interested in stories like that. Even everything I do is from a space of humanity. Even like if I direct TV, like I just directed a TV episode, I'm going to complicate the characters in some way through my direction and being a human, like I don't want to just have someone be a one note character.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's not really interesting. So I'm always coming from that space. All my films, I think you can see there's that, kind of humanity coming from, especially the main characters.
So, Najla, this is fun. Suggest one film that you would absolutely want people to watch and one that you think nobody should ever watch.
One film I think everyone should watch. One of my favorite films is Malcolm X, directed by Spike Lee.
What's your name?
Malcolm Little.
No. That's the name of the slave masters who own your family. You don't even know who you are. Who are you?
That's a film that I think is important to watch, just not only because you can learn, something about Malcolm X, who is my personal hero, but also just the level of craft in filmmaking and the performance of Denzel Washington is just, and a lot of the actors, it's just so riveting. I recommend that. The other thing, I don't know, I don't want to say the other, I don't want to be negative toward anyone, even though, there are films that I'm not a fan of, but.
Okay, maybe off mic. And in the end, Najla, if you were to define the United States of America in a word or a sentence, in the context of inclusivity in media, how would you do that?
When it comes to the United States of America and media, I think it's the people who are the anchors of inclusivity. It's the people in everyday society who are really pushing the boundaries of cinema, of media, of TV, and not the people at the top. It's the people who are on the ground and living just everyday lives.
That's so true. Thank you, Najla. This was so good. Now, can you tell people where they can see Jinn? I saw it 2 days ago on Roku channel. It was free there, which is wonderful. Is there a website they can go and check your work? And is there a way to watch Noor, the short film version, so that people can get to know what kind of content you're creating and why it should be funded?
Yes. So to watch Jinn, which came out in 2018, you can watch that on Amazon. You can rent or buy it. You can watch it on Tubi, I believe, with commercials, which is kind of weird. And yeah, you said Roku, I think YouTube TV. And for Noor, well, right now we're screening it at different places. So I'm going to Oakland next week and doing a screening of it along with Jinn. So it'll be kind of a hometown screening there. And then we have a screening coming up in Detroit at the Detroit Black Film Festival in September. There'll probably be other screenings, but it's also going to be streaming online in the fall, I believe. But I'll have more information on my Instagram profile, which is my first name, Nijla1, about when the film is available online for people to watch it.
Fingers crossed. Yes, inshallah. Thank you, Nijla. This was so good. Thank you.
Thank you. This was such a great interview. Thank you.
Okay, so can I say this? This is one of my favorite episodes. I had a great time talking to Nijla, and I just loved the tension in a good way, where two Muslim women could talk about how they approach media, content, storytelling from their own vantage point. It happens rarely, but I'm so glad that I sat down with Nijla. Guys, if you haven't checked the movie, please do. It's a human story at the end of the day. You will love it. And again, spread the word. As Nijla said, there is lack of funding for creators of color because you know what? At the end of the day, people know that it will eventually alter the power dynamic because what we see in the media, what we see in audio content, it really trickles down to policy, it trickles down to money. And at the end of the day, we cannot have the power, we cannot show our full humanity if we cannot sustain our work. It is so, so important. So please do check out Nijla's work and also subscribe to Immigrantly's channel on Apple Podcasts, Immigrantly Uninterrupted. You will get ad-free content for a very small subscription fee of $3.99 per month. Again, share our content, subscribe, like, talk about it, amplify our work so that we can sustain. This episode was produced and written by me, Saadia Khan. The editorial review is done by Shay Yu. Our sound designer and editor is Lou Raskin. Immigrantly theme music is by Simon Hutchinson. Other music by Epidemic Sound. Come back next week for another important conversation. Take care and have a wonderful rest of the day.